When you hear the word anticoagulant, I'm guessing most of you think of a life-saving, blood-thinning medication, and that you would not immediately think of rodent poisons. The anticoagulant rodenticides are a group of rodent poisons that include and are related to the drug warfarin, a commonly used blood thinner. It might surprise you to know that warfarin was used as a rodent poison before it was used medically. It might also surprise you to know that if you are in Massachusetts and you spot a red-tailed hawk as you're driving along the Mass Pike, the chances of that hawk having been exposed to an anticoagulant rodenticide are very, very high. And there's also a fair chance of that hawk bleeding to death due to that exposure. This problem has been the focus of my research as a wildlife veterinarian. In people with certain medical conditions, a drug that makes the blood clot a little slower is beneficial, but a toxic dose of an anticoagulant in the form of a rodent poison is designed to prevent the blood from clotting at all. For the past several decades across the world, the anticoagulant rodenticides, and especially a newer category called the second generation anticoagulant rodenticides, have been the weapon of choice in humans' ongoing battle with rats and mice. What's the problem with them? After an animal, any animal, ingests that poison bait, the active chemical in that bait is stored in their liver. If a predator, such as a red-tailed hawk, then preys on that first animal, the hawk has also just ingested that active poison. I went to vet school specifically to become a wildlife veterinarian because I wanted to give back to these animals that are so often negatively affected by human activity. My research on anticoagulant rodenticides, which I'll just call ARs from now on, came directly out of my work in the clinic, where I have cared for numerous hawks and other birds of prey that have consumed a toxic dose of an AR. You're looking at a photo of a red-tailed hawk that's feeling well. She's showing us that she is the boss. And this is a red-tailed hawk with AR toxicosis that someone saw fall out of a tree because she was no longer able to perch. She's too weak to stand or even react to our presence because of how much blood she's lost. We can try to treat these birds, but we are not always successful. I wanted to find out how common it was that the birds of prey coming into the clinic were in fact exposed to these rodenticides. From 2011 to 2020, I've published 3 separate studies that have sampled almost 300 hawks and owls from across the state, including the 4 species you're seeing in this photo. I found that a high proportion of birds were positive for residues of second generation ARs in particular. They weren't all necessarily showing signs of excessive bleeding, but they had been exposed. Across these 3 studies, the percentage of exposed birds has increased from 86% to 96% to most recently 100%. So what does this mean? It means that these rodenticides are getting into the food chain and bioaccumulating up to those animals at the top of the chain. Do they kill individual wild animals? Yes. I've seen birds die in front of me, and I've even had them die in my hands as I'm trying to treat them. How many wild animals do these poisons kill, and are they having effects on populations? This is something that's just very hard to study, so we don't have an answer to that question. Is this extensive exposure alone, however, reason enough to rethink our approach to rodent control? I would say yes. Does anyone remember during the shutdowns early in the COVID-19 pandemic when the CDC issued a warning about aggressive rats wandering the streets in search of food? This happened because restaurants and stores were closed. The dumpsters and trash cans the rats would regularly visit were empty, so they were looking elsewhere for food. There may be no better example of how human behavior drives rodent behavior. We, collectively as a species, have a rodent problem. The goals of my ongoing research are to understand the environmental risks of these rodenticides and to investigate the routes they're taking through the food chain in order to help find ways to protect our wildlife. Public health concerns related to rats and mice remain a real issue today, as my colleague, Dr. Rosenbaum, just so powerfully demonstrated. There's no question that we need to control populations of these rodents, but we very much need to question how we control populations of these rodents. All of us, as individuals and communities, can play a role in solving this problem. Thank you.